When I was living in Los Angeles, someone broke into my house in the middle of the night and tried to kill me. It was a complete stranger. I don't know if he was ever caught, although I'm hoping I find out in June because I finally put in a request to the LAPD. I was very, very badly beaten. And I thought for the longest time that the reason I was saved is because the neighbors heard me screaming. And that's definitely a part of it. But I learned actually that the reason I was saved is because I woke up and I was on my feet when it started. That was really important. So it was my own senses, my own sensory that actually saved me.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of Daftarkhwan Fireside. Today we have Susie Kahlich, who is the founder at Pretty Deadly Self-Defense and SINGE. And I'm your host, Mahwish Bhatti, and I'm a digital creator, and you're watching Daftarkhwan Fireside. So before we start the conversation, I would like to introduce Susie a bit into her professional credentials so far. So Susie she's a powerhouse. She has been advocating for women empowerment for the longest time, and she has dedicated more than 30 years of her life fighting the gender-based violence. And she has also been giving consultations to individuals, organizations, NGOs, NPOs over safety and sexual harassment. She established her multimedia company in 2021 by the name of SINGE, which not only focuses on gender equality, but also travel, integration, and immigration. Apart from her brilliant credentials, she is a creative writer, and she reads poems and words at different events, and she's also training young female entrepreneurs. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Susie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
It's an honor for us to have you here, and I want to start right away the questions, and we want to know your story. So the first question is that, what led you to the formation of Pretty Deadly Self-Defense?
Pretty Deadly Self-Defense was born from my own personal experience as a violent crime survivor. I survived a very brutal event that made me think, if something like this ever happens again, I want to be prepared for it. You can look up the story in detail online. I've written about it before, but a brief overview is, this was when I was living in Los Angeles. Someone broke into my house in the middle of the night and tried to kill me. It was a complete stranger. I don't know if he was ever caught, although I'm hoping I find out in June because I finally put in a request to the LAPD. I was very, very badly beaten. And I thought for the longest time that the reason I was saved is because the neighbors heard me screaming. And that's definitely a part of it. But I learned actually that the reason I was saved is because I woke up and I was on my feet when it started. That was really important. So it was my own senses, my own sensory that actually saved me. And that's something that we all have. That was something really, really important to discover about myself and about that event as I was recovering from trauma. My first instinct was to go straight to martial arts and bypass self-defense, which I think makes a kind of interesting comment about the state of self-defense and what we think about self-defense. I wanted to learn the real stuff. But as I was training, I was in a space that was safe enough for me to go back and revisit the event that I survived and look at the way that my biological self-defense system actually protected me in that moment. What I wanted to do was be able to form a program that was really accessible to women, that would be easy to remember and easy to do, and would be more positive as opposed to fear-based in self-defense training, so that women, when we experience violence, actually have the tools to handle that and disrupt it and de-escalate it. Self-defense is often presented as protecting against violence or preventing violence, and it doesn't do either of those things. That's a complete myth, because it's never the target's choice. Therefore, you can't prevent it. But what we can do, and what self-defense does, is it gives us the tool to disrupt, so it gives us a sense of autonomy. And when we do that, when we know that we've at least done something, that lowers the risk of long-term trauma. And it's really the long-term trauma that we're very focused on, because that long-term trauma changes the path of somebody's life. That's where I find it very unjust as a victim of violence. My life path was completely changed in about 5 minutes. It wasn't my choice. And I want people to have the choice over their lives as much as they can. So that's the
story behind it.
That's the story behind Pretty Deadly. That's why I do
Okay,
it.
so you went through this violent crime. So what were the challenges you faced right after that, and how much time did it take you to get over it? I'm sure it still haunts you at times if you think about it, right?
No, actually, it's an interesting thing. It took me about 40 days before I could sleep through the night. I really only felt safe in my car when it was moving, which is the worst time to go to sleep, turns out. Although we were just talking about traffic in Nepal, so maybe it's okay there. But anyway, here and everywhere else, it's a bad time to go to sleep.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to trust people again. It was very difficult to not feel really resentful. What I wanted to do first was move away. But another part of me said, if you move away, then that guy wins. He's chased you away. Absolutely. Now, in retrospect, though, I realize that would have been the smart thing to do. Because the truth is that guy didn't care. He didn't know me. I didn't know him. He had no idea what happened to me. Probably wasn't looking me up. I hope, because that would be terrible if he was. But nonetheless, taking care of yourself and your own needs is the first priority. But a lot of victims of violence, both men and women, after that event usually feel like I'm not going to let it get the better of me, so I'm going to stay here and I'm going to tough it out. Yeah. Again, that's a mistake. Your life has changed and you need to change with it, but that takes therapy, that takes work. I joined martial arts, and that was a really big part of my recovery. So was learning how to move in a way that was really effective, learning all the things my body could do without having to bulk up and get really athletic. It was fantastic. I think if I had only gone through psychotherapy and no martial arts, it would have taken me a bit longer. But it did haunt me for a very long time. Just loud sounds right after trauma. Loud sounds are really difficult to deal with. Bright lights, anything that moves fast. But even over the years, something might trigger something. However, this past January, I was in Los Angeles for the first time in a long time to train some Pretty Deadly trainers. And while I was there, I wanted to put in a request for my police report because I had thrown it away years ago and I just wanted to get it. Yeah. And to do that, you have to send a letter to the police department when you no longer have the report number, with the time and the date and the location. And I had actually forgotten the street address. So I had to drive over to the apartment where I was attacked. Oh, wow. Which I thought was interesting. Because I didn't know. Yeah.
Very brave of you.
Well, I didn't know how I was going to respond. I wasn't sure if I was going to break down or trigger or whatever would happen, but I actually got out of my car and walked to the front door of the apartment. I didn't knock because that's kind of like, hello, I was attacked here 20 years ago. Thought I'd say hi. I just left everybody alone. And it was okay. All right. I didn't feel anything. Actually, I thought, you know what? I would rent this apartment again because it's really cute.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
And what was important about that for me, that moment, was I realized that you can arrive at an end of trauma. I didn't ever know that there would be an end to that road. It's taken me a long time to get there, but now that I know how to get there, I can help other people get there faster.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So while you were working on the women's safety and empowerment aspect, how did you come around forming the community around your work?
It wasn't actually that challenging. It turns out that when I proposed Pretty Deadly in the way that we teach self-defense, which is really different from the way we normally think about self-defense, it really resonated with women. So most people who have taken Pretty Deadly, taken the course, tend to stick around. They usually want to stay involved. They want to help the program grow. They love the idea right away. Some of them want to become trainers. This is from our first groups in Berlin. Some of them want to join our volunteer programs. So they find it to be, one person said this to me in London, this is the self-defense class I've been looking for. So the community has actually been quite easy to build in a lot of ways. It's been difficult for me to maintain as a solopreneur. completely bootstrapped, so we don't always have the capacity to nurture our community in the way that we would like to, but that's something else that we're building as we're growing. It's been fantastic. It's been great to connect with women all around the world, here in Pakistan, Uganda, the United States, different parts of Europe. Talk to people and learn about their own experiences and the ways that we each stay safe, which can be different culturally, but it can be things that we share. So for example, here in Pakistan, all of you beautiful women also have really beautiful long hair. And I know yours is considered quite short, but I learned that quite a few women will kind of pull their hair over a side of their face to block out people who are harassing them. So kind of using your hair like a wall for self-defense, which I thought, what a brilliant thing to do. Yeah. That's great, because self-defense isn't about leaping through the air and throwing people and doing all the stuff you see in movies.
Right.
It's these little things. And sharing this across cultures and communities and around the world has been one of my favorite parts about the community that we're building.
So we continue on this, and since you've been giving the courses and you've been conducting workshops across the continents, right? So what has been, if you were to name one very, very rewarding experience so far in your life?
I mentioned Urat Raj and Sabah Khaled, who connected us with the Rural Support Network and the branch of Success in Sindh. They were doing some digital literacy programs with community organizers in rural Sindh, as well as menstrual hygiene and education. And they asked me to step in and teach some self-defense. We were working with two groups a week apart. So the first person that we worked with spoke Urdu, and then she was going to translate the next week into Sindhi for the next group of women. And we were talking about self-defense and why that might be interesting for people in rural communities. It's very much a part of our policy not to tell people that they are being abused, to tell people that the way that they're living is wrong, where we understand that people have different cultural structures than we do, and we don't believe in dictating our own beliefs onto other people. But what we do believe is that everyone, men and women, are vulnerable to violence by sections of society that like to do violence. We were explaining to the women that we were speaking to that when you're out in the fields with your livestock, that's often when you're vulnerable, and often when your male partner isn't around. So it's because he's doing whatever he needs to be doing. So that can be a good time to use self-defense. And we used a couple of examples like this, bringing products to market, just being out in a social environment with friends, which is often kind of away from everything else. Fetching water is another thing that women like to do as social activities, but where they can be vulnerable to violence in rural areas. So once we had this conversation, the woman that we were speaking to said, well, you know, I already practice a kind of self-defense with my Dupatta. You know, when I put my Dupatta on, and she mimed this movement, that's self-defense because I'm covering my body. And I said, yes, but also it's an amazing elbow strike. And in Germany, we call this swirl your cape, like a superhero.
Okay.
And she said, oh, yes, I can do this. So in Sindh, it's called the Dupatta technique.
Oh, wow.
Which she immediately practiced on her sister on camera that we saw. Her sister was maybe not so happy about that, but she loved it. In the week that we taught her the Dupatta technique, to the next week when we were going to work with the next group who only spoke Sindhi, we learned that this woman taught every single woman in her village the Dupatta technique.
Wow.
And then she went on to teach the group in Sindhi. And I thought, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Because that means that what we're teaching can transcend culture and transcend language and still be effective.
So would
That's
you say,
my proudest moment.
Oh, that's actually amazing, because I was coming to this question, if you had to tweak your courses or workshops, considering the socio-cultural demographic of Pakistan, did you have to tweak a lot or not?
No, it's just really, from our end, it's about learning terminology that we don't otherwise have. You know, we don't call Dupatta in Germany, they're just called scarves. Yeah. So it's learning things like that, or how you might wear it that's a little bit differently. But there's nothing that we have to tweak that much. because the body is finite. It's always only going to move in certain ways. And there's certain structures. We don't focus on strength and speed, we focus on structure, because that's where the power actually is. And that's the same for everybody, regardless of your culture or your beliefs or where you live or your gender or your identity. It's all the same. But so when you're wrapping it around you like this to kind of cover your body as a form of self-defense, is also an elbow strike that looks like this. And if I can have a volunteer, I can show you what that looks like on someone. I won't hurt you, I promise. Okay. What I've done though is even this move, even very gently, see how it affects her balance and moves her forward. Yeah. It doesn't even hurt when I'm doing it, but she can't resist. That's because I'm going across balance points of the body. Again, it's about structure, it's not about strength and speed. So that's it, Dupatta technique. If I was to do that fast, that would be very painful. Yeah. I think you know that, yeah.
When you established SINGE in 2021, how do you see its impact in the future on gender equality?
Pretty Deadly was growing quite a bit, and over the course of time, because I'm always thinking about self-defense, I found myself coming up with 2 additional products at larger scales. One is for mobility, which is a project called Halo, and it's to deliver self-defense techniques in mobility apps like Uber or Careem. This came because I was in the back of an Uber and the driver was being creepy, and I thought, you know, what do I do about this? Except I already know because I have a course about it. But I thought, but if I don't, I want those answers. So I created this, and we won a mentorship, and that's been growing. So that's for mass transit and Uber and Careem, et cetera. And our other project, again, because of my relationship, my growing relationship with Pakistan, I was aware of the devastation of the floods and the fact that the flooding happens on a somewhat regular basis. Yeah. And I came across a report about how many women will not go to displacement camps because of the threat of violence, and how that can have a domino effect to the spread of disease, to rebuilding communities, to hygiene needs, to all the things that can happen. We want women to be able to go to a safe space. So we created SINGE partly to deliver these products. We have a product for displacement camps that's a mobile app for first responders that's using AI-generated blueprints to just create a smarter layout for camps that prioritize the safety and hygiene needs of women. They're the most vulnerable groups, and then everyone is safer. We needed kind of a holding company for all of these things to tie them all together. And realize as we've been going along that what we're doing is we're focusing on creating a safe haven. We focus very much on immigrants, what we call shifting populations, which can be refugees, immigrants, migrants, asylum seekers, expats, digital nomads, everybody who shifts and moves, which is a massive amount of humanity. We all have the same basic needs. Safety is our first need, integration, economic independence. Yeah. So we found that there's no one place for new arrivals to find that information. And we want to be able to provide that place. So we are creating an ecosystem called Haven, where immigrants and anyone who identifies as a shifting population member can find what they need. And we're starting with safety, the first basic need on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
If you were to ask the parents in Pakistan to take some practical steps to protect their children against gender-based violence, can you name a few steps?
For parents of girls, it's important to encourage body literacy. I was speaking about this earlier today, actually. This is true everywhere in the world, that we have a division of knowledge, right? Girls get a lot of knowledge about emotional intelligence, about our reproductive systems, and actually also about our sexuality and our sex drive. We get almost nothing about our bodies. Yeah. Right? Maybe in my country where I come from, they might be cheerleaders, which is very skilled, by the way. It's very athletic, but it's also very performative. Boys, on the other hand, get denied a lot of that information because it's too feminine, but they get body literacy. You grow up play fighting with your brothers or the neighborhood boys. You grow up wrestling in school. You mimic all the fights that you see in movies. But every single time you're doing any one of these acts, you're learning about the balance of your body, you're learning body dynamics, you're learning how to fight, and you're learning how to defend yourself. This is why men are not the targets of violence. I know they're the targets of muggings and theft and stuff like that, but not the targets of violence in the same way that women are. People who inhabit violence choose women because they know that we don't have this information. So I would say parents of girls, encourage your daughters to learn how their bodies work, not just as future mothers, but as humans. To not necessarily be strong, but understand how everything works, understand the structures and the functions. For boys, understand emotional intelligence, but also understand your own sexuality. Even though there's always the louder news is always there's not enough studies about women's reproduction and menstruation and blah, blah, blah. But actually, there's almost nothing about male hormones. Like nothing. We know all about testosterone, but we don't know about hormonal shifts in men, which they do experience as they get older. When we don't understand how our bodies function in all of these ways, then it's really easy for us to overlook some of the things we do that might be harmful to others. And this is where I think sometimes boys, as boys, or grow up into men who are inadvertently harmful to women. They don't want to be, they're good people, and they don't really see what they're doing as harmful because there's a separation between these other aspects of their own biology. So it's mostly education, I would say.
Right. So you have been providing consultations to organizations over sexual harassment with regards to women and making those organizations safer for women. So when it comes to Pakistan, what do you think can play a major role in making the organizations safer for women?
I would say the same thing that I say in Europe as well. It's really about understanding the value of women at the workplace. A lot of sexual harassment in the workplace is really based in bullying as ways to kind of subtly or not so subtly push women out of the workplace. So it's important to keep everyone together and listen to what they have to say, listen to what they have to contribute. I was just actually on a WhatsApp message with some of the security people at Kareem, actually, about our product that we want to work with in Kareem, letting them know about some of the information I just received this morning from a group I worked with of women, how they're using Kareem, how they're staying safe, and the kinds of things that they're doing about it. They had no idea that this was happening because they're not being inclusive enough. Excuse me, I don't work at Kareem, I don't know what the offices are like, but I know that they didn't have this information.
Because I think women are pretty reluctant in advocating whatever trauma they go through because everyone gets so suspicious around them. Really, are you sure? Are you sure about his intention? Is this what he meant? Maybe you misperceived it. So there's a lot of confusion around them. So that's why a lot of women do not actually communicate.
It is important to talk about the experiences that you've had. That's one of the ways that we start to release it. The other way that we start to release it is through therapy, is through support networks, and is through our bodies, through movement. That's actually really important because we store trauma in our bodies. So our bodies need to be able to release that trauma as well. There are different ways to do that. I chose martial arts. I like that. I'm sorry, but I really enjoy hitting people. I enjoy throwing them. I like kicking. I love it. It's great. But not everybody's into that. There's really good trauma yoga. There's something called trauma release exercises. You can pick up running. Anything is fine, but make sure that there's a mind-body connection. To advocate for the things that you've experienced, you have to feel safe first.
Let's talk about the future goals you have for SINGE and Pretty Deadly Self-Defense. In the longer run, how do you see, what are the goals you have set for both organizations?
Pretty Deadly is a subsidiary of SINGE. So as Pretty Deadly is successful, so is SINGE in a lot of ways. Our goals for Pretty Deadly in Pakistan are to, or I was using the term recruit more trainers. So we don't actually hire trainers. We have a train the trainer program. Our program is designed for fitness professionals to use. It's accredited by governing sports bodies, NASM, ISSA, SIMSPA, AFA. So that is of value to the trainers themselves. It's a program that they can run whenever they want. They can run ours, or they can just use what they've learned to construct their own, but ours is already ready, so it makes it easier.
Yeah.
We want to get more trainers certified so that Pretty Deadly is more accessible around Pakistan. We have 2 trainers in Islamabad. We have a growing demand in Lahore. We'll have a growing demand in Karachi as well. So, of course, we want to have people there to be able to meet the demand. For SINGE in general, as we're creating our network, as I said, we're starting with basic safety needs. We're kind of bringing in this group of users into what we're hoping is a safe haven through these products, whether it be refugees or expats or migrants or immigrants or just anyone, women, of course, who might feel vulnerable. Once we have a large enough group of users, then we'll also start bringing in outside providers for some of those things that immigrants need right away. Documentation. In the US, you need a credit score to get anything. So there are some organizations that provide that. Banking. Most Uber drivers, I'm not sure about here in Pakistan, but I know in Europe, most Uber drivers are immigrants. From whatever country you're in. They're usually from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because Uber and Cream create a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
That's great for people. But then they also have to know, how do I get a license? How can I do that? So we want to be able to work with those providers. Usually an immigrant activates their immediate networks to find their needs, which is only as good as that network. Bringing it all together, there's a huge, huge, huge potential for growth and innovation and support, but there's also just a gigantic financial potential. We feel that the idea of being able to disrupt violence in these ways, whether it's a rearrangement of displacement camps or learning a physical self-defense technique, as I said, that actually lowers your risk of long-term trauma. And that's what we're really focused on. When you're suffering long-term trauma, there's a part of you that lives in that moment forever. That means that you're using the same self-defense forever in every part of your life. That affects all the people around you, usually in very negative ways. It affects your own ability to progress in your life. And you're going to teach those things to your children as this is how you handle situations. But your children don't have the context that you did. So now they're just learning trauma tactics that are no longer applicable to their situations and that become abusive. And this is how the cycle of violence is perpetuated. So we hope that with our products, as well as our Haven ecosystem and SINGE in general, what we're really trying to do is break the cycle of violence at the very, very seed of it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So my next question is that what success or failure means to you?
Success means to me pretty much the story that I told of the Dupatta technique. That's success. Being able to communicate with people in a meaningful way, transcending culture and language, is the most wonderful thing in the world I think that humans can do. Sharing, I think, is the only true point of our lives, sharing our knowledge. So to be able to do that is successful to me. Failure, I guess, would not be being not able to do that.
Yeah. All right. If you could have dinner with one historic figure who has fought for women empowerment, who would that be?
That would be Nina Simone. I don't know if you know who she is. Does anyone here know who Nina Simone is? She was a singer from, I guess she started in the 50s, right, through the 70s. She also was very much an advocate for civil rights, but she was also an advocate for women's rights, and I find her to be one of the most fascinating humans.
Have you ever used your any of the self-defense techniques you teach in the real life situation?
Yes.
Like after that incident?
I have. I say that with relish, but the situations are actually really scary. But I'm kind of proud of myself. So yeah. I have. One was an intimate situation on a date gone wrong.
Oh.
I was feeling quite afraid and thinking, oh no, this is going to happen and I'm going to be really hurt and what can I do? And then I remembered, oh, that's right.
I know things.
I'm this person. Let me just use one of these techniques and get out of it, which I did, and that was fine. The other person was not too happy about it, but oh well. The other time that I personally have used it is we also teach a vocal self-defense, which isn't necessarily screaming, but it's being able to use your voice in a bunch of different ways, kind of as a weapon. And one of the ways that we teach is something that I call mom voice.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that everybody here has a mother.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure that at some point, as you were a child, your mother was so annoyed with you and she had a certain tone of voice that made you realize, uh-oh, I better go do whatever this is because this is the end. We can use that voice, and I'm sorry, gentlemen who are sitting here, it's more of a female thing to use your mom voice on men, but it's great. It works really, really well, and that's the other time that I've used it, and also a situation that was getting quite scary.
Okay.
We've had other people use techniques. We get wonderful emails from people saying, guess what I got to do? This thing happened to me today, and I got to use this technique. And I love that because it means that a situation that might have been traumatic has now just turned into a story.
It's very encouraging to have these stories around that you don't really have to be very scared in that moment.
A question that I get asked a lot is, or not a question, but a request that I get asked a lot is, how do I, or can you teach me how to respond? I don't want to freeze. I don't know how to respond. I just want to know. I want to be able to be calm and assess the situation. And what I can only say is that that is martial arts. That's training. That is something that I can do, but I only know that purely by accident, meaning something startled me and I found myself, instead of tensing up, I found myself relaxing and getting very calm, but also being ready. That only happened quite recently, and I realized that took me 20 years of training, or a little over 20 years of training, just to get to that point. It's more normal for all of us to be surprised when something happens, because it's surprising.
It is?
It's shocking. Yeah. It's totally normal to kind of have a little glitch in your brain that says, you know, wait, what? What's happening?
Yeah.
It's okay for that to happen.
Yeah.
It's totally normal.
What's the most interesting cultural tradition you have experienced during your travel, which you think could prevent gender-based violence?
Here's what I've been learning about Pakistan, and I got to experience it myself yesterday when I arrived in the airport, is how quickly and easily and generously and kindly, I'm going to add because it's really impressive, people will intervene. When I was at the airport, everyone was trying to get through customs kind of all at once. And a couple of gentlemen sort of intervened and said, you know, let's just make some space so you can go first. Not to be polite because I'm coming from a different country, but it was very clear that it was, you need to get out of here because it could quickly become dangerous for you. So we're going to intervene and make sure that it's safe.
Yeah.
And I've heard stories from other people that I know in Pakistan that it's quite normal for everyone to kind of get involved when you hear somebody needs help. I think that that's wonderful. That's totally not going to happen in Germany, I can tell you that much.
Okay.
It's not really very common in the United States as well. It's a little more common, but not to the degree that I see and I've learned about here in Pakistan. Yeah. I think that this is such a wonderful aspect of the culture, and especially of men who feel, I don't know if you feel a duty or not, but it's just a normal response, like step in, help out.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
Two practices that I like to engage in for that. One is something that I mentioned before called trauma release exercises, which is something in the body. It's actually to do with shaking, where you kind of encourage your body to shake gently. Just to start releasing the trauma. It follows a specific pattern. The other is actually a kind of a ritual. And you have to be at a place where you feel really ready for it. And I don't mean you can light candles if you want and light incense, but it's really more about revisiting that person in that moment, because she's still there. She's still negotiating. She's going to stay there forever until you go back and let her know that you're okay now and she can stand down. We have to go back and reunite with that person. I had to do that too. So when we've suffered violence and we've suffered trauma, two things happen to us. Part of us continues on with our life, but we also always want to go back to the few seconds before it happened, We're always trying to get our lives back to that one moment just before our life changed. And nothing ever works out. We might feel like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, we're destroying our relationships, all kinds of things are happening, but it's because you're trying to go back to something that you can't go back to. The other reason that we're shooting ourselves in the foot and things aren't working out is because that person who's still there is now defending against everything, including the person that's gone on. So we have to reunite these things and let her know, you've been doing a great job. But in the time you've been defending me, I've learned how to defend as well, and you can come join me here now, and you can stand down. I've got it. That will end your triggers. You're welcome.
Okay. Anyway, so we're going to conclude this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. It was such an amazing, look into your entire journey from getting into that violent crime and then making it all the way here and everything. It's such an inspiring story. I hope for every woman who's going to watch it later, who's here right now with us, is going to take a lot of lessons from you and a lot of encouragement and bravery from you. Thank you so much for your time, and we will conclude it here. So do join us for another session some other day with Daftarkhwan Fireside.